the amount of knee braces that I saw on this trail, make sure you got strong ankles. Do your squats, calf lifts, because you'll be using all those muscles on this trail. So I hiked the Tour de Mont Blanc in late August 21st through the 27th to be exact. And spoiler, I had to get off trail. I did have to get off trail a day early. I had about 20 miles left, but I'll get into what led up to that. For now, I'm gonna talk about my gear. I'm gonna talk about itinerary, how I planned it, food, staying in refuges versus camping, how I trained, mistakes I made, and what I would do differently. So let's just get into it. All right, let's talk about gear. So it's no secret that this is a very unique trail experience, unique to Americans at least. The infrastructure and regulations around European trails are just very different than the US. So I'll put my gear list in the description of this video. So I'm not gonna go over every single thing here, but I will say that my gear pretty much has been dialed in for a few years now. And I haven't gotten a ton of new things. So you can even check out my gear video from when I hiked the Tahoe Rim Trail back in 2023. Aside from a couple of things like the bear can, I pretty much brought the same things. I packed for like high alpine conditions. So I packed my puffy jacket, I packed my hat. I used my Six Moons Design one-person tent. I used my Thermarest sleeping pad. I did try to cut out some weight. I wanted to carry no more than 20 pounds with my food and camera. And I was able to do that by eliminating a couple of small things. I used my pump sack, like the little bag that you fill with air to pump up the sleeping pads. So I used that instead of the electric pump. But I also had to take a couple of extra things like the wall charger with the EU adapter. I didn't have to carry as much food as I'll get into that later because there are plenty of food options on the trail depending on your budget, which really helped with the weight also. Nor did I have to carry any sort of bear-proof gear, right? Like I didn't have to carry an earth sack or a bear canister. I didn't have to worry about animals on the trail because they've all been eradicated. So like I said, you can check out my gear in the description, and maybe if you want, I can make another more detailed video about like the exact things that I took specifically for this trail. But for the most part, yeah, my summer backpacking gear list pretty much stayed the same for this hike. So I had the idea that I wanted to experience some of the Refugio culture, but I also wanted to camp. So I booked 2 Refugios and 1 nice hotel. And I booked those in April of this year. And a lot of them were already full or had 1 or 2 beds left. So if you want to do the hut to hut thing, make sure you book like 10 years in advance. I'm just kidding. But you just got to book as early as you can. I think some of the places open up for bookings in September, maybe the year before. So yeah, I would get on that if you want to stay in all of the huts all the way through. And I'll put a link in the description for where you can book, because it's not, I think you can Google it and it'll take you to the website, but I'll put the link that I use because the website that it takes you to, you still have to do a little bit of navigating to get to the actual huts where you're going to book. I'll break down really quick how our itinerary went. So on day 1, we stayed in the hut. Day 2, we camped at a campground. Day 3 was a hut. Day 4 was also a hut that was unplanned. We were supposed to camp that night, but some certain circumstances led us to getting a couple of beds in the hut that day. Day 5 was a hotel, like a nice hotel. And day 6, I camped. So not exactly how I planned it, but things happen on the trail. You can plan as much in advance as you want, but things are going to go wrong. Things are going to happen, and sometimes you have to adjust. How do I feel about the huts? All right, so I might get some flack for this, but the huts are not for me. I don't know. I really do prefer my own space, and I wasn't crazy about sharing close quarters with other hikers. I actually ended up getting what I believe to be bed bug bites from one of the huts, which ended up causing some allergic reactions on my face and some swelling around my eye, which ultimately took me off the trail. Uh, you also don't really have a lot of flexibility with the huts, so you have to be there by a certain time, or they can give away your reservation to somebody else. So those days that we stayed in the huts were just more stressful, and the days where we camped were so nice. Like, it was just so peaceful. I loved it. And I know a lot of that has to do with weather as well. And so what I will say is that the huts are really great for when the weather is bad and you just need a warm, dry bed to stay in. When I hiked in Iceland last year, I had bad weather one of the days, and I was able to get a hut kind of last minute. You know, it was expensive, but I was glad to stay warm and dry that night. But if I were to do it again, I would probably camp in my tent each night. And, you know, you still get a lot of the amenities at these campgrounds as you would in the huts. You know, a lot of the campgrounds are close to bathrooms, close to restaurants, the little stores. So I would probably spend each night in the tent at a campground, and then book 1 to 2 nights at a nicer hotel. Food is a big highlight on this trail. Yeah, I mean, it's a big reason why a lot of people will hike the Tour de Mont Blanc. There's so many restaurants and huts, you know, where you can get lunch and get pizza and pasta and soup and all that stuff. You can definitely eat your way through the entire trail. And it's great. The food is great. So I'll talk a little bit about how I did my food prep. As I was saying before, I did a hybrid of camping and the huts. And so my original plan was that we were going to camp for 4 nights. And so because of that, I packed 4 dinners. So 4 like regular dehydrated meals. And then I also packed 2 to 3 days worth of snacks. And that worked out for us pretty well. We got into like a major town on the 4th day in Coimer, and that's where there was like a good grocery store where you could do your resupply and things like that. Now, there are a lot of variants and alternate routes you can take, but the first grocery store that we saw on the trail was on the evening of day 2 at our campsite. And it wasn't like a full grocery store, but it did have enough to kind of pick up some snacks. Like there was bread, sandwiches, meat sticks, chocolate, things like that, more of like a deli. And then the first proper grocery store we saw was in Coimer. And there was another one on the next day in the town of La Fouli. And in addition to that, a lot of the huts along the way will serve lunch, and we bought our lunches each day. So which was usually like pasta, maybe a soup. But yeah, the food was really good. The lunch food was great. So if you decide that you're on a tight budget, you might want to bring your food, and I wouldn't carry any more than 3 to 4 days worth of food, because there really are a lot of resupply options on the trail. All right, let's talk about training. How I trained, how I prepared for this hike. Let me just say right off the bat, you want to be trained for a hike like this. You want to be in shape. You want to be fit. Otherwise, you're not going to have as good of a time. You know, I mean, there are buses, there are cable cars that you can take to opt out of certain sections. But, you know, I mean, if you want to see all the nice views and really get the full experience of the trail, you know, it helps to, you know, have some miles under your belt. There's a lot of elevation and a lot of descending as well. And so, you know, if you're planning on doing this in 2026 or 2027, you know, take the winter time and use that time to do some training, get on the Stairmaster, try to find some nice hills in your area and get that weight vest on, you know, and start hiking up those hills. So my training routine of choice are HIIT workouts, so like the high intensity interval training workouts. So I have a gym membership that does a lot of those HIIT classes, and I always tell people at the gym that like you can make it as hard or as easy as you want. So depending on how my body's feeling, depending on how hard I want to go, will determine kind of how intense I make the workout for myself. So I'm not necessarily doing 50 burpees every time I, you know, do the workout. But like, for instance, I went to my first HIIT class since coming off the trail last week, and the class was intense, but I, you know, decided to take it a little easy. You know, I used lower weights, and instead of doing box jumps, you know, I would do step ups, things like that. And so, you know, you can modify the workouts however you need. But it helps me focus a lot on the strength training, strengthening my core, my calves. I also did a few overnight backpacking trips, so that served as good training. And I also run about twice a week. So I'm starting to run a little bit more because we're getting into kind of the fall marathon, half marathon training. And so, I might be doing a half marathon in October. We'll see. We'll see if I can get the miles in. But that's kind of what my training workout looks like. So it's a lot of HIIT workouts. It's a lot of running. And then if I can get out on the trail on the weekend, I'll do that also. How are we looking on exposure? Okay, I'm starting to lose a little bit of light, but we're doing good. I'm almost done. All right, next I want to talk about mistakes and what I would do differently. And I'll throw some bonus things in there at the end, so keep watching. One thing I would do differently is I would probably bring shorts, an extra pair of shorts. So I had my hiking shorts, and then what I normally wear to go to sleep is I just wear like a pair of looser leggings. And that's what I had for my sleeping clothes. But in the huts, it got really hot a lot of those nights. I think there was only one night where it was like comfortably cool. But the other nights that we slept in the huts, it would get so hot, just uncomfortably hot. And you're sleeping in your liner and you don't want to come out of your liner because you don't want to touch anything. And yeah, a lot of uncomfortable nights in the huts just because it was so warm. And so if I were to do something like that again, I would probably bring an extra pair of shorts just for sleeping if I knew I was going to be sleeping indoors. On the contrary to that, another thing I would do differently, I pointed it out before, but I would camp in my tent. I would camp in my tent each night. That's just very much a personal preference. I mean, a lot of the people we met on trail, probably most of the people we met on trail, seemed like they couldn't imagine camping in their tents. They were all doing hut to hut. And yeah, it seems like most people on the trail are doing that. But yeah, the nights that we camped at the campground were just so nice. They were so much less stressful and quiet and less chaotic. And yeah, I just enjoyed it a lot more. So I would definitely camp in my tent each night, and then I would book like 1 or 2 nights at a nicer hotel to get a proper shower, wash clothes, things like that. Another thing I would do differently, this is probably the biggest mistake I made. This was a very logistically challenging hike to plan. And one of the hotels that I booked, I actually ended up booking the wrong hotel in the wrong location. I booked one that was like 50 miles away in another part of Switzerland. I tried to check in the hotel that I booked, only to realize that I didn't book that hotel. I booked a different hotel in another part of town. And I said, oh no, that is great. And I had to like send him an email and see if I could get a refund and then book the other hotel. And so I definitely lost some money on that one. But yeah, I probably, would just need to pay a little more attention on locations and making sure I'm booking the right place for the right day. It was an honest mistake. I was doing my best with all of the information that I had and all the research that I had done. And so, it was kind of a simple, honest mistake. But yeah, I guess it could have been avoided if I had, maybe paid better attention. So just make sure when you're planning out the logistics, just make sure you got all your locations set and your days right and your times right and all that stuff. And there are a lot of group tours and people that do consultations that you can hire if you want to do that will help. Because yeah, it can get a little confusing when you're dealing with the different countries and the languages and all of that. So yeah, that was probably the big whoops of the trail for me. Okay, so the big question, would I hike the trail again, or would I go back to finish the trail? I don't know. I'll never say never, but I will say I might need to get a little bit further from the trail. It's only been 10 days. It hasn't even been 2 weeks yet. And so I think there is still a little bit of disappointment, I guess, from not finishing it or not everything going the way that I maybe wanted it to. But honestly, overall, like I said, it's a beautiful trail, beautiful landscape. You meet some great people. I met some really cool people from Germany, from Israel, from China. I think we met a guy from China. One of the huts that we stayed in Italy was just really fun. There weren't a ton of people there, but like the crowd was fun. One of the guys had spent some time in Baltimore, and so we were able to talk about like Maryland stuff, and so that was cool. That was like a good experience. And so as I get further away from the trail, I am able to think more about some of the more like fun, positive memories that I had. Whereas I think I think when I first came home, I was like, oh, I'm kind of sad. I didn't get to finish it. But yeah, it was a good time. It really was. Another tip I'll give is always have a plan B, just a plan B option. So whether you're planning on camping or whether you're staying in the huts or whether you think you're not going to make the mileage that day, always just have some kind of plan B option because, yeah, anything can happen. Like I said, this trail has a lot of steep ascents and a lot of steep descents. The amount of knee braces that I saw on this trail tells you what kind of trail you're about to be on. So make sure your knees are prepared. Make sure you got strong ankles. Do your squats, do your kettlebell swings, do your calf lifts, because you'll be using all those muscles on this trail, okay? Do not be deceived by all of the beautiful scenery. This trail is a hard trail. It's not that easy. I remember my last night, the day before I got off trail, the climb was just so brutal. I was climbing in the evening. Maybe it was because it was in the evening and nobody else was really around. I think I maybe saw 2 people and there were no views. Well, there were some views, but a lot of it was just steep climbing. And I just wanted to get to camp. This was after my bites started to swell up and they were uncomfortable. And yeah, it wasn't very fun. Okay, and bonus, how much money did I spend on this trail? So I actually broke everything down the other day and I spent just under $2,500, so $2,500. And I'm just gonna round it up to 2,500 because there may have been a few things that I forgot. But yeah, it came out to just under $2,500 for the entire trip. So that included the Refugios that I booked, the hotel, that included my flight round trip. I even splurged a little bit and upgraded my flight to like the premium economy, or yeah, I guess where you get like the footrest and the bigger screen and all that and the better food. It was very nice. Used some of my credit card points. So that was a nice upgrade. But yeah, all of that included came out to about $2,500 that I spent on this trip. So yeah, that gives you a rough idea. That was for 8 days of hiking, even though I left on the 7th day and I had to get an extra night at a hotel, so it included that as well. So that gives you a rough idea of what you might be spending on the trail, say if you're gonna do a hybrid of camping and huts like I did. Another really cool thing I got to see was the UTMB race, the big ultra marathon out in Chamonix. So the day that I got off trail was the day that I think maybe the 50K race was going on. So that was awesome. I mean, the atmosphere was like electric in Chamonix. There were people cheering. You heard the cowbells. It was really, really cool. And I'd seen so many videos on YouTube of the UTMB, and so it was really cool to see that in real life. Okay, I think that is it. If I left anything out, please let me know in the comments. Feel free to ask any questions. I'm happy to share more of my experience. And yeah, there'll be a video coming very soon. So yeah, until the next video, appreciate you guys watching. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one.